Welcome in, everybody. It's a Big Noon Kickoff, the off-season edition here. Lots to get into, obviously, in a busy off-season, but pleased to be joined by my colleagues, Bruce Feldman. He's down there, our college football insider. Matt Leinart, the legend from USC. I'm Joel Klatt, be hosting today. Rob is clearly, I don't know, jogging on the beach or something somewhere, guys.
Who knows what he's doing?
Yeah, so I'll take over for today. Lots to get into, though. Listen, we got an ACC/Notre Dame preview, so we'll get after all of those topics. We're going to have Manny Diaz, head coach of the Hurricanes. He's going to join us for a quick interview. We're also going to talk about our impact freshmen around the country and who are the new faces that are going to be impacting college football in a big way. But first, guys, listen, you can't talk about the ACC. Similar to Ohio State in the Big Ten, Oklahoma in the Big 12, and Alabama in the SEC. What is the ACC about? It's Clemson, right? So we start with Clemson in the ACC. They've won 6 straight ACC titles, and now they're going to have to replace that guy, the number 1 pick in the draft, Trevor Lawrence, at quarterback. They have to replace Travis Etienne, who is the ACC's all-time leading rusher. So some big shoes to fill there for the Clemson Tigers. I guess the question then begs, fellas, and Matt, I'll start with you. Will DJ Uiagalelei pick up where Trevor Lawrence left off?
I absolutely believe he will, and it's actually very similar, guys, to my situation in a way where Carson Palmer was the Heisman Trophy winner the year before, the number 1 draft pick. And I remember just mentally like, oh crap, like these are some monster shoes to fill playing quarterback at USC. Obviously, the expectation, the pressure. I think the difference with this situation is we saw DJ be great in 2 games last year against Notre Dame and Boston College. So that's the biggest difference is we saw a small sample size, but we saw him absolutely flourish. 9 total touchdowns, no takeaways. Obviously, they lost to Notre Dame, who ends up going to the playoff, but he had to come from behind win against Boston College. So this is a kid with the mental capacity and the pedigree to be able to handle, I think, this type of situation, given he played high school football at St. John Bosco right down the road from us in LA, one of the top programs in the country, played against top teams on national TV every year. He's kind of taken that mindset and taken it at Clemson. And I think he's going to have, I don't want to say a better year than Trevor won a national championship, and obviously he's a generational talent, but DJ's phenomenal. And then you look at the pieces around him, and you mentioned Travis Etienne. Obviously, that's a big loss, and maybe we'll see, a running back by committee approach there. But Justin Ross comes back from injury. We know how talented he is. That will help. And then the defense, Joel, you and I both know, quarterbacks rely on a great defense. Their defense is going to be nasty this year, in my opinion. So all of the pieces kind of around him, we know Clemson is going to be great again. I think DJ is going to have a great year. I think he's going to be considered for the Heisman Trophy at some point. And also Clemson is by far and away the clear-cut favorite to win the ACC again.
Joel, I really like Matt's comparison. The two different parts for me with it, though, is when Matt took over for Carson had that huge senior year. But before that, I felt like that was just when USC, the program was starting to awaken. Right. Whereas this Clemson program, even before Trevor, you had Deshaun Watson doing amazing things, winning a national title there. So I feel like the expectations are sky high as to what he's jumping into. But again, I felt like the talent around Matt was probably better on offense, certainly, than what Carson had. And so you see, as he said, Justin Ross, you see the receiving core is a lot of freaky big receivers. I think the biggest plus is something that he just hit on is the defense is going to be a lot better, because a couple of years ago when they were playing for a national title, they had the loaded defensive line. Then the last 2 years when Christian Wilkins and Cleveland Farrell and those guys moved on to the NFL, it was a dip. Tyler Davis was there, but it wasn't as good. Last year, all those 5-star guys on the D-line were true freshmen, Miles Murphy, Brian Brise. Those guys are now sophomores. They've had a full off season. It's not coming out of the COVID abbreviated off season. I think Brent Venables has some really good pieces to work with. They still have James Skalski to line everything up. They still have a lot of really good players on the defensive end. I think that will be a big difference for Clemson this year, is that the defense is going to be much scarier than it's been in the last 2 years when they were a title contender, but not as good as where they had been.
And guys, let's not forget, right? Like, this is still a sport. Yes, it's run by these powers, right? But within conferences, it matters a great deal what your schedule is. And their schedule to be the preeminent power and not have to play basically the top two contending teams, I would argue, in your conference during the regular season. That's a huge win when you're breaking in a new quarterback, right? So Dabo has the benefit of not having to play North Carolina and Miami in the ACC schedule. I don't think Florida State is what they have been in the past, clearly. So their biggest question or hurdle becomes the first game. I mean, that's the hardest game on their schedule by a wide margin. Wouldn't you guys agree? And they've got that Georgia game September 4th. It's in a neutral. Obviously, Bank of America should be a pro-Clemson crowd, but you know how Georgia travels. So they better be ready to go right out of the gate. The thing that I always come back to, though, is in our current format, a team like Clemson is going to get the benefit of the doubt. So even if they lose to Georgia, even albeit save for a blowout loss, all they got to do is kind of roll through the rest of their schedule, which is imminently possible, at least in my estimation, and they're probably going to find themselves in the college football playoff. That's kind of the situation we find ourselves. So regardless of what they have or don't have coming back, I think that's a huge feather in their cap. And then I would just echo this point. Matt, the two things that I would desperately want if I was a young quarterback with huge expectations is a solid run game and a great defense. I think that the run game is probably a question mark. Remember, they were 11th in the ACC last year running the football. You lose Travis Etienne, who was unbelievable catching the ball out of the backfield. So those are questions that I would have moving forward. But you guys are right. That defense is going to be great. And I do think they're going to be challenged right away, by the way, because that Georgia offense came on strong last year, throwing the football late in the season. All right, let's move on to one of those teams I was talking about. Miami, guys. Expectations for Miami. And I think that really starts and maybe ends with D'Eriq King and how he comes back physically after this injury. So Bruce, I know you've been close to Miami for quite some time. You're a Miami grad. What do you think about D'Eriq and his expectations coming into this season?
I think last year they hit the ground running. Now, look, they got better on the offensive line, but that had been an Achilles heel for Really, that's part of their decline from in the last 15, 20 years is they hadn't been very good up front. I think they have gotten better, but that was exposed when they played Clemson last year. They could not hang with them. I think what you'll see from D'Eriq, even coming off the injury, everything I've heard is that he has been full speed ahead and people are excited. He's got a lot of energy, brings to them. They have some dynamic receivers they can give to him. Mike Hartley is a playmaker. Charleston Rambo, who you saw a lot at Oklahoma, he transferred there. He's a big play guy. And they don't have Brevin Jordan, but I think there's a lot for him to work with. And to me, the biggest thing D'Eriq King brought with him when he transferred in there, and I think Rhett Lashley, the OC, has done a really good job with him. But Miami, between the offensive line issues and there was a once upon a time that Miami was quarterback when it was Jim Kelly and Bernie Kosar and Vinny Testaverde and Gino Toretta won a Heisman. And then it really kind of, after Ken Dorsey left, and that was a long time ago, it's really flatlined. D'Eriq King brought a presence to them, and he's a playmaker. Now, he's a different kind of playmaker than Miami had at quarterback, but I think he is a really good trigger man. The thing that I think the question to me, whether Miami can go beyond being very good to being a legit playoff contender, is are they good enough up front and in the trenches where Miami used to be great to be a legit powerhouse? And I don't think we're going to find out until they face a really good team.
Well, you're going to find out real quick. September 4th, they're going to face Alabama, guys. Maddie, I want to love Miami. I really do. Like, I want to say, man, they're going to challenge this year. I have a couple of hurdles. Bruce hit on it, right? Like, what are they up front? Because ultimately, that's where it's going to be won and lost against what I think is going to be an incredible Clemson defensive line. So if and when they play them potentially down the road, what are they going to be up front? Alabama, I think, is going to totally overmatch them. Now we'll see with an experienced quarterback like D'Eriq King. The one thing that they have to do, though, is continue to play efficient football on the offensive side. That's what I thought he did best. So you talk about Rhett Lashley, Bruce, and D'Eriq. That marriage, I thought that marriage manifested itself best in efficiency. It wasn't just like explosiveness and touchdowns and yards. It was the fact they didn't turn the ball over a lot. At least De'Eric didn't. You know, that was as good of an efficiency season as you've seen from a Miami quarterback going back to those days that you were talking about in the Ken Dorsey era. So I think that is a huge feather in their cap. And Charleston Rambo is a hell of a player, guys. So they're getting a dude there on the outside, Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean the highest rated efficiency at quarterback since 2000. You know, so definitely going back to that era, Ken Dorsey and those guys. And to think about, you guys mentioned Rhett Lashley, Bruce, the first year, a COVID year, a shortened off season, you know, not a lot of time to build chemistry. I mean, that's a real thing as a quarterback, especially transferring in. And then you look at just the year he had, efficient, didn't turn the football over, clearly a very dynamic player, which is what makes him who he is. And assuming he's 100%, you know, he's going to continue to be that. Up front, you know, they should be better, as you mentioned, Bruce. And then I think Charleston Rambo, he's a key player. You know, didn't work out for him at Oklahoma, but we saw glimpses of that, Joel, in the last couple of years of what type of explosive athlete he is on the outside. Look, it's a lot like, it's like the Clemson Georgia game. You know, this Miami, I do think Alabama, you know, probably is too much for them up front, especially on that defensive line. But look, it's week one. Miami has the talent and the quarterback to make a run at Alabama. Alabama has a lot of question marks. Bryce Young, obviously, I'm a fan. I think he's a tremendous player, but all those guys they lost. Imagine Miami comes out week one, and even in a loss, if they play well, you know, they'll make some noise. But you know, Miami's been that team. You know, the last couple of years, they start fast, and then down the stretch, for whatever reason, they just, you know, they'll lose a game or two, and they'll kind of get out of that. You know, they'll eliminate themselves from that race. So I had a chance, really quick, to talk to De'Eric this summer at a quarterback camp in LA. And I'll tell you what, guys, and Bruce, you may know him fairly well, but a really, really impressive young man, a natural leader. He was there at this camp and he was almost 100% at that time. He said he felt great. I was just really impressed with the way he handled himself. You know, this is a kid who's been around college football for a long time, a lot of experience. So Miami's in great hands with him. He's a tremendous player, and if he's 100%, which we assume he is, Miami they'll be in the thick of the race in the ACC for sure.
Hey Bruce, I'm interested because I know you know Manny pretty well, and he's taking over play calling duties on the defensive side. Remember, 2 years ago that defense was very good, top 15, and then a couple of years ago, right, 18 and 19, and then last year they fell, right? And they stumbled down the pack. I think they were in the mid 60s, 67th in defense in 2020. And I get it, COVID year and everything. He's taking that deep. That's where he cut his teeth, right? You remember, he is a defensive coordinator. How do you think that affects Miami this year?
You know, I think you got to remember when he came to UM with Mark Richt, and I think Matt was really alluding to this that night. I was actually watching it from our buddy Brady Quinn's with him in Ohio. They played Notre Dame, and I don't think anybody thought Notre Dame was going to lose that. And they definitely didn't think Notre Dame was going to get blown out of the building. And they had the turnover chain. They had all that momentum, but it was all really coming from Manny Diaz's defense. It really wasn't at all the offensive side of the ball. That was the best part of the Mark Richt era. And I think Manny does have a good feel for the players there. Now, the challenge is they have had some really good D linemen who are difference makers. Yep. Greg Rousseau 2 years ago, he opted out last year, but first round pick in the NFL. And then last year, you know, you had Jalen Phillips, who was even freakier coming off the edge and making all sorts of plays. I don't know if they have a real difference maker in the front seven. I do know they got some really good athletes on the back end. Tyreek Stevenson comes in. He was a high recruit for Georgia. He's a 215-pound corner who has a ton of speed. I think his presence will help them on the back end, but I don't know if they got the guy on the front where it will give him a lot of luxury to put people on their heels, because he did a really good job as a defensive coordinator in the SEC when he worked for Dan Mullen. He obviously did a good job at UM. I just don't know if he has, you know, like we were talking about Alabama week one. Alabama has three amazing linebackers right now that Nick Saban can really lean on. I don't know if Manny Diaz right now has anybody of that caliber or close to that to really give opposing coordinators something to really worry about.
My dad was a coach, and I know everyone has heard this, but it's like, it really doesn't matter what your X's and O's are if you don't have the Jimmys and the Joes, right? And so, alluding to your point, challengers in the ACC. That was a lot about Miami. I think all of us are probably somewhat bullish on the quarterback there for North Carolina and Sam Howell. So Matt, is that the other team with the best chance to maybe unseat Clemson?
It is. I would pick Miami in that, and just to echo really quickly with Miami's defense. Remember a couple of years ago with the turnover chain, Bruce, you mentioned, and I don't know what they were, maybe top 10 in the country. I mean, they were the takeaways every single game. I think last year they were 11th in the conference. It's very hard to sustain that category every single year. And you better have the players, the guys up front, collectively. If you're not creating those takeaways, how else are you going to find success defensively? And we might have saw that a little bit last year, and that's going to be interesting to see this year. Yeah, North Carolina, Joel, obviously, when you have a quarterback like Sam Howell, you're going to be in a lot of games. And you have an offense like that can score a lot of points, you're going to be in a lot of games. There's a lot of question marks for me for North Carolina, though. One, all of the skill players they lost. So they lost a lot of great players, running backs, receivers. I believe they have Ty Chandler comes in as a transfer running back who's very talented. So they'll be able to get some production from these skilled players, but it's going to be more on Sam Howell to make this team better around him, which I know he's ready for. And then defensively, that's the big issue for me. I mean, I think they return a bunch of guys, but just because you return a bunch of guys doesn't mean necessarily they're getting better. I think we saw a lot of holes in that defense. They gave up a lot of points week in and week out. So for me, that's going to be the key, because when you play Clemson and that defense, you might score 21, 24 points, but you're going to have to hold Clemson to under 30 points to have a chance to win. The same probably with Miami with their dynamic quarterback. But I think this comes down to Miami. It comes down to North Carolina. One of those teams maybe knocks off Clemson. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I mean, to lose, De'Ami Brown was a blow the top off of the defense receiver. They had two really special running backs. And Chandler is a good running back. I don't know if they're going to be as explosive now. De'Ami Brown's younger brother is even faster, and they said he is every bit the playmaker. But we got to see it at this point. I mean, because I feel like they have been so good in the first couple of years. Phil Longo's offense is really a derivation of the air raid from Mike Leach. And I think that it put people back on their heels. I think it gave them in the ACC some challenges. I'm not saying they're going to solve it, but I think the bar is really high to meet for them to be as good. One team I would keep an eye on, I feel like they have a chance to maybe surprise some people, is Pitt. Kenny Pickett's a really good, underrated quarterback. I think Pat Narduzzi's done a really good job upgrading the talent there. I feel like with Pitt, it's a little bit of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, where they'll play somebody really well and hard. Maybe they'll upset somebody and then they'll stumble somewhere along the way. But I think because they have a really good combination of quarterback and skill guys, I think they have a chance to have a top 20 season. Now, where if that can push them beyond a Miami and a North Carolina, we'll see. But I think they're an interesting team to watch, them and as well as BC. I know, Joel, you and I both spent a ton of time around Jeff Hafley, and really he's a rising star. Yeah. They have some pieces to work with. They're really good on the offensive line. Phil Jurkovec, if he can be more consistent, I think they're a team also to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and he's upgraded their recruiting in a big way. Obviously, North Carolina has. I think North Carolina, their last 2 classes nationally have been in the top 15. Mac Brown's doing a great job. But when you look at 2 years ago, so basically Hafley's first class, nothing to write home about, 62nd in the country. This is his first, you would call full class, 37th in the country. So he takes a huge jump up in recruiting. I don't know if that's going to pan out on the field right away, but I'm with you. I look at Boston College. I see the way that they played some of those teams last year. I thought that they hung tough against North Carolina. They hung tough against Clemson. He's a really good coach. It's also interesting. I was talking with another ACC coach about North Carolina, just to go back to that, put a bow on the North Carolina discussion. And he said something interesting to me. He said, when they decided to just sit there and throw the football, I took a big sigh of relief because I didn't have to deal with those backs anymore. He thought that the backs made him tick. And if they were giving the ball to Javonte Williams and Michael Carter more specifically, then they were a problem. And he thought, man, we're going to have a hard time here in this second half. They start pitching it around, and he's like, oh, phew, now I can handle this a little bit. So speaking to that air raid discipleship, stemming from Mike Leach, sometimes that can hinder teams. And I wonder if North Carolina will commit to the run game like they need to, because that's one of the main reasons why they had such a good offense a year ago. Okay, not in the ACC, but obviously kind of that partnership. They were in the ACC last year. We'll see what happens in the future. Notre Dame, fellas, we got to at least chat a little bit about Notre Dame. They're replacing 8 starters on offense. Seems like Ian Book has taken every snap for the last 3 decades at Notre Dame. So we're going to see Jack Cohn at quarterback, the transfer most likely from Wisconsin, who didn't necessarily lose his job, but injury and the situation. All of a sudden, Mertz steps in as the more highly recruited player at Wisconsin. And now here we go. Notre Dame, who has recruited really well. Brian Kelly has a program, guys, that I believe in thoroughly. And what do you expect from the Irish, having to replace so many faces that we've seen play so successfully over the last couple of years, Matty?
I think they're going to be right in the mix of it again. There's a couple question marks, but starting with the positives, I like Jack Cohn. I think when Ian Book, who had a tremendous year last year, I still think you were a little handcuffed with what Ian Book kind of presented to that offense, a little bit like maybe Jake Fromm at Georgia. Now that you see what JT Daniels kind of did, I think Jack Cohn, who's not the athlete Book is, but their ability to probably throw the football a little bit more downfield, open it up a little bit, especially with the talented running backs that they have in Kyron Williams and Tyree. So I think Jack Cohn's got a shot. I mean, he led Wisconsin to a Big Ten championship a couple of years ago, won a lot of games in the Big Ten, which is not easy to do, doesn't turn the football over very often. I think we'll see, in a way, somewhat of a new look type of Notre Dame offense. They're going to be good up front. They replace some guys. Their tight end is excellent. So it's still going to be your physical, run the football with those great running backs, take some shots downfield. I think defensively is a concern. Obviously, Kyle Hamilton is a star. He's a first-round draft pick. They have a couple guys up front that might have breakout years. But I look at the schedule, and I look at Wisconsin, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech, USC, and North Carolina. 4 of those teams are in the top 20. And those teams are very good. And Wisconsin's going to be very good this year. We know Cincinnati's got a shot to be in the top 5 potentially. Virginia Tech is always challenging, and then USC's got a shot. And then we just talked about North Carolina. So, for Notre Dame, do they go through that gauntlet right in the middle of the season, undefeated or with 1 loss? I don't know, but I'm interested to see how Jack Cohn plays and how this offense kind of evolves from Ian Book.
Yeah, I just looking at the schedule, 2 things jump out at me right out of the gate. Matt just talked about Jack Cohn. I think Joel, and I both did games. I think I might have done the first game he started at Wisconsin, and so he's going to play his old school, and then they play a Cincinnati team that we know is really talented. We had Luke on this show last week. By the way, Notre Dame's new defensive coordinator, he knows Cincinnati better than anybody, Marcus Freeman, because that's where he just came from. So, and they're going to have a bye week before they're playing Indiana, then they're off, then they get Notre Dame. I think that, and no one at Notre Dame, because of Freeman's connections, is going to think, oh, this is a group of 5 team. We can just our A game. But to me, what is going to help Jack Cohn out more than anything, I remember doing a story last year coming off the first Clemson game on Kyron Williams, and the coaches there had told me how off the charts he was in the detail stuff, in blitz pickup, a lot of the things that young running backs usually struggle with. And I think he is such a security blanket. Matt mentioned Chris Tyree is really explosive. Is he a guy who can be another Bryce Love kind of weapon to really complement him? That is a great 1-2 punch. We know Notre Dame always has really good tight ends. They do again. The question for me a little bit about whether they can, because we know they're going to be really good. The question is, can this program take the next step, which is compete with the heavyweight teams? And the biggest difference there, I feel like, is they do not have the dominant guys on the defensive line that we've seen from some of these SEC programs. We've certainly seen from Ohio State. And when it comes to that, where unless you have a first round quarterback, on the other side, if you don't have a great quarterback and you don't have a great D-line, I think it's really hard to not have either one of those things to make a real run at winning a national title. And I don't know if they have that right now. We know Kyle Hamilton's special. We know they have good athletes around him. I don't know if there's anybody that Marcus Freeman has to work with now on the D-line who is going to take over games and be so disruptive that they can hang with great teams for 4 quarters in the playoff.
And to your point, what we've seen over the last few years, maybe more so. And Bruce, I mean, you're not old, but you've been around and covered this sport at a really high level. And so correct me if I'm wrong. So this is kind of top of mind for me is I feel like our national champion is getting better as it relates to the rest of college football, because we've had a separation of the haves and the have-nots. Those 5-6 teams that are legitimately competing for a playoff spot have separated themselves. And then you look at the team that actually wins it of those 5 or 6, they've become historically good teams almost annually. So to your point, right? Like that's the next step for Notre Dame because we've seen them put themselves right at that bottom tier of the top 6 programs in the country, which is great. That's not a knock, right? And if Brady were here, he would be incensed right now that I'm putting them at the bottom of any category.
But they held
you guys kind of get what I'm you get what I'm trying to say, right? Like they are there. 2 of 3 playoff appearances. They're a great program. They could win every game on their schedule. Of the really, really good programs, they're probably the best. But when it comes to those teams that can take that next, 6th, 7th gear, if you will, and win a national championship, Bruce, to your point, do they have those guys? I guess that's the open-ended question.
Well, look at it this way. And I mean, look, Matt's sitting here, he won national titles. He was a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and he had Mike Patterson and Sean Cody, on the other side to cause problems. I'm trying to think about it off the top of my head. You had Jacob Coker, who won a national title when Lane was the offensive coordinator at Alabama. He played well, but he was certainly not the caliber of quarterback we've seen with Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. Didn't play at the level that we saw Tua play or, Jalen Hurts on the ride to the national title for Alabama. But even when Coker was there, the flip side was they were scary good on the defensive side of the ball. And I just think that, there were times where LSU won national title for Les Miles. They didn't have, a real elite quarterback, but they had that on the other side of the ball. And so I think if Notre Dame doesn't have one thing, and look, Ian Book was a really good college quarterback, but if we're not saying Jack Cohen is going to be Trevor Lawrence, a Justin Fields or somebody of that caliber, who do they have who's going to be the Chase Young or the, that guy? And I don't know if they have that guy.
Yeah, well, I don't think you can win it with just one of those. And I think Ohio State proved that last year, right? Their defense wasn't up to par. So as good as Fields was, their defense wasn't up to par to play with Alabama. And they got absolutely torched by Alabama. So, to your point about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, real quick, Joel, just you mentioned those titles, and even when I was there, I mean, the game has just shifted so much and changed so much offensively. I mean, you talk, Coker and the Les Miles run. I mean, you're looking at, drop back passers, I formation. It's just a different game. So to the point we're all making is you better have the dogs on the outside who can change the outcome of a game. You better have a dynamic running back. And then on defense, you better have a Chase Young. You better have, in my case, Cody, Patterson, Kenichi Odezi, just guys that can disrupt the whole game on that front. It's just they're missing those, those key, just dynamic players that you need to play with Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State and even Oklahoma.
It was also, guys, and listen, we're previewing the ACC. Haven't talked about Florida State. And from a field perspective, I don't think that they're at a point where they're going to be competitive. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the legend and one of the best to ever do it. Bobby Bowden passed this week. And, Bobby was college football for my generation, Matt generation. You and I, Matt, we grew up during his run of 14 straight top 4 AP finishes is just staggering. Even as great as Alabama has been over the last, decade plus, they're not going to top that. in all likelihood. A couple of years ago, they finished 8th, in the AP poll. So what he did, it really brought college football to the next level. But Bruce, I know that, you got to cover him a little bit as you were cutting your teeth and just getting into the industry. It wasn't just about the wins and losses and the success for Bobby Bowden. It was really about him as a man.
Right. And I think there was a charm to him I felt like it was kind of different. And the way I would describe it is coming up, I was relatively new to the national college football beat. And I was much younger then, in my late 20s. And being around him, the thing that really jumped out at me right away was, I would describe it as, he was shockingly accessible and shockingly approachable. And what I mean by that is, I would consider him a Mount Rushmore kind of football coach.
Yeah.
And the other coaches who I would say were of that caliber, and there weren't many of them, they did not have the same kind of aura about him that Bobby Bowden did, where it just felt like it wasn't, I don't want to call it like an everyman quality, because he still had just he was just so personable. Everyman is not like that, but he was just really, really just easy to be around and made you feel comfortable. And so, I know I mentioned this to Matt offline, but like Travis Johnson, who is a big time defensive lineman from Southern California, I once did a big story on Bobby Bowden at ESPN magazine, and Travis really took over the story and was just talking about how Bobby Bowden gets us. And he just talked about how he related and connected to players. And remember, at that point, Bobby Bowden was probably around 70. So it wasn't like he was wasn't older at that point. I just feel like his ability to make people feel comfortable, make people feel like he genuinely cared about them as people and their families, that was very authentic. And so, the success was remarkable. Part of the reason why, I think, was because he was so true to himself in a business where it's not always that easy for people to do that. And a lot of guys can't do that. He could. It was a gift. And he's just had a really unique gift, and he made a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah. Oh, real quick. I never had the pleasure and honor to meet Coach Bowden, but Joel, you said that era and just the time is when I first got into college football. So I was always like Florida State, Charlie Ward, Chris Wenke. I mean, the 90s when I really first got into college football. And then now, when a legend like this in our game passes, you kind of go back and think like, wow, like just what he meant. And then I was fortunate to play for Pete Carroll, who will probably go down as one of the best college football coaches of all time, and just what he did in that run. And we were around Urban, and now we're around Bob Stoops, just very legendary coaches for what they did for their programs. And Bobby Bowden and Bruce, I love hearing that stories, because the great coaches really have an impact on the young men off the field, listening to Danny Cannell, who's a buddy of all of ours, talk about Coach Bowden, and you just mentioned Travis Johnson, who's a good buddy of mine from LA. You just see the impact. And although I never met him and knew him personally, I feel it because of what college football is and how much I love it and how much we all love that sport. So just sending a lot of love and prayers to the Bowden family, not just the Florida State family as well, but just college football, because we really did lose truly a great one.
Joel, one other thing, just to button it up on this. Mm-hmm. As Matt was saying, it dawned on me that like a lot of these big time coaches, at least in college football, there's a lot of people who, if they don't know them or they're at the wrong school, they really kind of hate them or resent them. You can rattle off some coaches of that era, and people are like, yeah, I never liked that guy, or root against his team. I didn't feel like there were many people who were out there who didn't like or respect Bobby Bowden when he coached. They felt like they really liked him. And he was harder to root against, certainly, than some of the other coaches of that caliber, close to that caliber, especially in the 90s, late 80s, early 2000s. That was another thing that made him, I think, different than some of these other guys that, from that era.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sad to see, there's no doubt. And certainly, we got the reaction not only from Florida State, but other programs. This is what Florida State sent out via their official Twitter account. Today, we lost a legend, but you never lose a legacy. Rest in peace, Coach Bowden. And of course, FSU is synonymous with Miami and those legendary battles of the early 90s and the field goals missed and made in those matchups in Miami, as every great rival should, respecting the other side with their own sentiment. Our condolences to the Bowden family and the Florida State football program on the passing of Bobby Bowden, who was instrumental in making the UM-FSU rivalry one of the greatest in college football. Rest in peace, Coach. Let's now chat with a man who spent some time with the legend, Coach Bowden. That is current head coach for the Miami Hurricanes, Manny Diaz. Coach, thanks for joining. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
I just want to start there because I know you did spend some time under Coach Bowden. How did he impact you as a coach, in particular a young coach at the time? And what do you think that his legacy will be in college football?
There's a great saying that not all great men are great men. Coach Bowden was beyond a great man. And to be able to learn at that time from a man who had not only won so many games, when I got there, they already won their first national championship, but to see how he led that football team, how he led that staff with the humility, the grace, the selflessness, it was remarkable to see. And it was something that you wanted to be able to, as a young coach, I mean, that was something that was so impressionable. You wanted to be able to incorporate that at every other job and every other place that you've had a chance to work.
And you guys certainly coming off a great year and trying to build that legacy of success that Coach Bowden did. And now here you are, a year after going 8-3, you're 14-10 as the head coach of the Miami Hurricanes, and you return 19 of 22 starters, Coach. So expectations now are sky high for you guys. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted when you took the job, first as a coordinator and now building as the head coach. How do you feel like your club has dealt with those expectations being heightened here in the offseason?
Well, they came to Miami. The expectations of this place are always the same. Right out that window, there's 5 national championship years that our players walk by every day. Our players came back because we didn't end last year the way we felt we should have. We got off to a really good start and didn't finish very well. And they sensed that maybe there was something special. They wanted to run it back again, and started with De'Aaron King and his decision to come back, and the rest of the guys all joining in. And they have worked this offseason and through the first 5 days of our practice with a real intent and a real purpose that we're trying to continue to take a step closer and closer up the top of the mountain. The climb gets harder the higher you get, but these guys have been up for the job so far.
And that 8-1 start that you just referenced, that puts you as high as number 7 in the country at one point. You guys did falter down the stretch. You have back-to-back losses. You finish 8-3. Still a quality season, but obviously room to grow. And when you evaluated your program from your seat in the offseason, and you thought, where do we need to take the next steps? What are the areas of your team that you feel like needed to improve and need to improve here this fall?
Well, I'll give you 2. One tangible football, one a little bit more intangible. From a football standpoint, we've got to run the ball better than we did a year ago, and we have to stop the run better than we did a year ago. And then we want to feel a different way about ourselves on the big stage. Obviously we start on the biggest stage you can possibly start on this year, opening the season with Alabama, and the way that we've represented ourselves in those type of games, even going back when I was a defense coordinator here, to me, I don't think it's really representative of our squad. And so to me, we've languaged about that a lot. We've talked about that a lot. What it takes to be able to perform on those type of stages, to be our best version of ourselves. Whether it's good enough or not, it's a different thing. But let's at least give a proper account of where we're at as a program. And we got a great challenge to start first weekend.
I was just talking with the guys before we brought you on about the next steps, and they also mentioned, and we all kind of mentioned, that ability to run the football, be better in the trenches. You guys return all 5 offensive linemen. It's got to be a comforting situation for you, but those 5, they've got to take the next step, don't they?
Absolutely. It's not just our top 5 that come back. It's really the next 5 beyond that. We've not had depth in our offensive line like I've seen now, not since I've been at the University of Miami. And that's making our practices better, not just when our 1s are going, but when our 2s are going. And there's real live competition. Those 5 come back, but those 5 are not guaranteed to start for us. And I think that type of competition is adding a different edge to our practice, and also being year 2 in a scheme. All of our backs are back. the second year in Rhett Lashley's scheme. I think all that will make us a better running football team this year.
And De'Aaron King, right? I mean, listen, we're all hoping that he comes back 100%. Bruce was talking about the fact that by all reports, he has looked great so far and that he is 100%. But, you know, from your evaluation, where is your quarterback now coming back after that ACL injury in the bowl game?
He's been phenomenal. I mean, it's really remarkable to watch him through these first 5 practices. I mean, you don't talk about picking up right where you left off. I mean, he's, but, you know, it didn't happen by accident. The guy worked as hard as I've ever seen anybody work since the day he came out of surgery. I mean, he started his PT and his rehab right away. He's done everything, you know, they've asked and more. And I'll tell you, these first 5 days of practice, the way he's throwing the ball and the way he's taking off and running, he looks like midseason form from a year ago.
You talked about wanting to feel different about yourself as a team on the big stage. Yeah, how important do you think it is for De'Aaron to be back healthy, and then his leadership? You know, he's not just a transfer anymore. Like, this is his club, right? And in that locker room. And do you think that will kind of ooze through when it comes to your feeling as a team when you get to that big stage, in particular against Alabama?
Well, that's how our players feel about De'Aaron. They feel like anytime he's with us, we have a chance to beat anybody in the country. So, you know, obviously his play is phenomenal, but the way he leads our football team behind the scenes is like I've never seen.
And lastly, Coach, you're going back to some duties on the sidelines rather than just being the head coach and albeit, you know, being in charge of the entire team. You're going to go back and take over play calling duties as far as the defense is concerned, trying to reestablish yourself at the top end of college football like you were in previous seasons. What do you think the key is for you in particular now having to replace some very talented defensive linemen?
Well, we do have to replace some talented guys, which is kind of the norm here in Miami. The key is rebuilding the trust. You know, I didn't feel like we played with a great amount of player-to-player trust a year ago. Defense is all about trust. It's all about leverage and counting on the guy next to you. And I know that all sounds cliche, but it's still true. And that comes from accountability. And so we've had to practice hard in spring, and we're off to it again here this first week of camp of reestablishing what it means to be a Miami Hurricanes defense. We lost that a year ago, and it doesn't come back by talking about it. There's only one way, and that's on Green Tree practice field, putting the work in every day.
Well, I got to tell you, as someone that just loves college football to begin with, I can't wait to see you guys continue to play at the top end and restore that tradition that you started to restore last season. So, Coach, thank you for joining us, and best of luck this season, man.
Thank you very much. I can't wait either.
You bet. One of the best parts about college football is the quick cycle. We see stars leave, but we get new ones every single year. So we threw out the question on Twitter, which freshman will have the biggest impact this season, knowing that we've seen great freshmen over the last few years, guys, and welcome back, fellas. We've seen great freshmen have huge impacts on college football globally. We've seen now true freshmen win national championships at the quarterback position and true freshmen at the running back position and defensive ends and so on and so forth. So here's how we threw them out there. This is the Big Noon's top impact freshman. Number 5, KOREY Brooks, wide receiver from Alabama. Obviously big shoes to fill with that receiving core. At number 4, we have got Korey Foreman, the defensive end for USC. Highest rated USC signee since Matt Barkley. So we're talking about over a decade. At number 3, it's Agiye Hall, another wide receiver, highly recruited for Alabama. Obviously, that wide receiver room has been legendary over the last couple of years. So we'll see how those two youngsters impact the Tide. And then 2 and 1, it's TREVEYON Henderson at Ohio State, the running back. And then our number 1 impact freshman is going to be Will Shipley, the running back at Clemson. Let's start there, Bruce. Will Shipley, why do you think he's going to be such a huge impact player for the Tigers?
Well, we know not only did they lose Trevor Lawrence, but obviously they lost Travis Etienne, who was a great all-around running back. Now, I talked to one of the Clemson coaches yesterday, in fact, and asked him how Will Shipley is doing. This is a guy who was a state sprint champ, really tremendous speed, great hands. But the thing that the coach told me yesterday was they have been pleasantly surprised how physical Will Shipley has been running between the tackles. Now, I said Travis Etienne, who had breakaway speed, but also was really physical. said, does he have that kind of capabilities right now? And the word was, he's a really strong upper body kid. He's probably not quite there yet in terms of lower body strength. So I don't know if you will see him get quite the workload that you would see last year. I don't think he'll pick up exactly where Travis Etienne became as a feature back, where you could do so much with him on all 3 downs. But this guy is going to be a dynamic big play weapon. But don't underestimate his ability to run inside the tackles, because that is something that has really impressed his coaches so far in camp.
Matt, I know that you won a Heisman at USC. We'd love to talk about the USC offense, in particular now with this new air raid offense that they've had over the last couple of years. They score a lot of points. But it's a defensive guy that earned your top spot on the top impact freshman, Korey Foreman.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the impact he's going to have off the field and on the field. First of all, we just saw the highest rated recruit in 12 years since Matt Barkley. So what that tells me is obviously USC has not been able to keep these homegrown kids from Orange County, LA home, because they've had a lot of top ones. You can go back to DJ and Bryce just a couple of years ago, the top 2 rated quarterbacks in the country right in their backyard who left. So the impact off the field, getting a guy like Korey Foreman, just the hope is to have that domino of starting to get these types of players back into the USC pipeline on both sides of the football, especially with with NIL and the way college is. USC is still a massive brand. So I think his impact off the field, with just being that recruiting other players in LA in that area, I think could be huge. And then on the field, you read, I haven't been out to practice. I'm actually going to get out to practice hopefully next week, but all of the coaches saying he is as good as advertised, and he is everything they hoped he would be. A big guy, 6'5", 2.
We lost Matt for a second. We're trying to get him back, but I'm gonna transition really quick to my top guy on the board, which is TREVEYON Henderson. And Bruce and Matt, if you're back, the reason I had TREVEYON, okay, no, that's fine. The reason I had TREVEYON Henderson at number 1 is 2 reasons. Number 1 is Ohio State really leans on their run game, and their run game has been great over the last couple of years. In particular, with J.K. Dobbins run for over 2,000 yards a couple of years ago. Trey Sermon late last year, remember, he set the Ohio State record for rushing yards in a game in the Big Ten championship game, well over 300 yards in that game. And TREVEYON Henderson was actually the number 1 running back recruit in the country, while Will Shipley was the number 2 running back recruit in the country. Henderson, this is my second reason, guys. They are going to feature him, and also he was there in the spring. And he impressed a lot of people in the spring. I know a lot of these guys come in the spring and are there, but being there in that program and earning the trust of not only the coaching staff, but their strength staff, which is a big deal. Coach Mick Moriarty, their strength and conditioning guy, and their new quarterback room, which is going to be a new quarterback. They're going to have a running back that really produces at a high level earlier in the season. And they have, let's just say they're excited about TREVEYON Henderson. So I'm excited about TREVEYON Henderson. All right, let's move on here. Bruce, you and I both love these Alabama wide receivers. Why do you love these young kids?
Well, look, as we've said, Nick Saban has had a ridiculous run of getting big-time receivers, really starting with Julio, but just you look at all the guys they brought in, especially out of South Florida. Ja'Cory Brooks fits in that category, but Agiye Hall, he hit the ground running in the spring. He was a dominant receiver in the spring game. So you lose Devontae Smith, obviously a Heisman winner. Jalen Waddle, even though he was hurt for much of last year, was a real playmaker. This is a big physical receiver that they're bringing in now in Agiye Hall. And I think when you're talking about Bryce Young getting established there as a new quarterback, everybody knows he's talented. Who will he lean on? He's got John Mechie back. He's a really good playmaker. Slade Bolden is, I think they feel like they can count on him. But who else is going to be outside who's going to really be that guy? Maybe if they have 3rd and long that they can look to, or a red zone guy. Jalil Billingsley, who was a X-factor tight end, he's had some challenges maturity-wise, and I think he's somebody who they're still trying to get settled in to see if he can become the playmaker they think he can. Agiye Hall looks like he is already going to prime to be that guy. It wouldn't surprise me if he was a big weapon for them in the red zone this year.
Yeah, Alabama has had the best wide receiver room in the country over the last couple of years, right? OU has always been up there with a great wide receiver room. I would say Ohio State probably currently has the best wide receiver room in the country. And I'll be interested to see how these young guys, and Ja'Cory Brooks, he is a huge producer, comes out of the Miami area, went to Washington High School. A couple of years ago, he almost had 100 catches in his high school season. So he's huge, but it takes a group. And that's why, you know, Brooks and Hall are up there. And then lastly, Matt, a guy that didn't make our consensus top 5, but was on your top 5 list for Ohio State, Jack Sawyer, the defensive end.
Yeah, and again, was there in the spring, and really for me, it's just, and it's kind of like, as you mentioned, for Ohio State, that running back position is so key for Ohio State. So you just expect kind of the next person to come in is going to have production and success, and we could say D-line you, D-end you, could be Ohio State now with the Bosa brothers, and then Chase Young just a few years ago. I think Jack Sawyer has a chance to be like that in a couple of years. He's an Ohio State kid. Obviously, you see the production in high school, but this is kind of, you know, having Larry Johnson, the D-line coach, probably the best D-line coach in America. For me, it's just, all right, well, the next big-time recruit comes into Ohio State. He's going to expect it to be a talented player. I think Jack's got that opportunity. Obviously, Garrett's back and Harrison. So there's a lot of really good experienced players back for Ohio State, which might even open up more of an opportunity for him to get one-on-ones and play. So I would expect him to have a very productive and a very big role, and maybe as the season goes on, become kind of the star player that I think they think he can become.
And Bruce, they also just got, I mean, Jack's one of the highest rated defensive ends in the country.
They have another one too.
Yeah. The kid from Washington, hard name to pronounce. It's Tui, you know, Mala'alo, or I'm butchering
You'll
this.
get it. You'll get it right.
They got two top
I'll get it
guys.
right. Listen, I've got their game against Minnesota, but they're stacking these guys up now. And when I went out there in the spring, and Bruce, you'll agree with this, they're too deep at basically every position on the field, save for quarterback, right? So like, this is a really good team, Ohio State, and to your point there with Jack Sawyer.
Yeah, JT, by the way, the kid from where Brock Eward's from, up in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people who I trust in the recruiting circles think he is the most talented player to come out of Washington State in the last dozen years. So you put him, he was a basketball guy on the other side of Jack Sawyer. And it wasn't like they didn't have any, you know, Malik Harrison is still there. He's a freaky long guy. Larry Johnson has a lot of tools to work with now in his belt.
No, there's no doubt. Well, fellas, this has been fun. Again, big shout out and thank you to Coach Diaz for joining us from Miami. And it'll be us again next week, or we'll see. We'll see if Matt's on the beach and we'll have to replace him. We'll see who we got. But we're going to talk about the Big 12, and we're going to talk about our top Heisman candidates going into the 2021 season. This has been fun, fellas. Appreciate it. Bruce Feldman, Matt Leinart. I'm Joel Klatt. This has been Big Noon Kickoff, the off season. See you next week.